Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And Ginger's passing out a letter that I know you have probably somewhere in your mountain of emails, but I promised this family I would bring it to your attention with my remarks. It's from a long-standing Greenville family, former mayor of Greenville and a Holocaust survivor. And I think the words in that letter are powerful, and I wanted to bring it to your attention.
Thank you very much.
But my name is Patrick Kelly. I'm Director of Governmental Affairs for Palmetto State Teachers Association, a 17-year teaching veteran in this state, and it still teaches APUS government every morning before I come to work for PSTA. And let me start by thanking you for your time and commitment to hearing so many diverse perspectives on these bills. As someone who just called in a favor with my neighbor to pick my child up from track practice, you should be commended. But as your work progresses, let me encourage you to turn down the volume a little bit on the areas of disagreement, or as Representative Morgan said last time, look past the partisan talking points and look for the areas of consensus in what you're hearing from individuals. And I'll share that there are two that I think are worthy of your attention. First, there's been universal agreement that every South Carolina student deserves access to the highest quality history instruction. But the bills before you have some elements that would inhibit that instruction through my lens as a social studies teacher. The importance of a high-quality history instruction has never been on more stark display than it is right now because of the events happening in Ukraine and the piercing question asked by President Zelensky over the weekend to all of us when he asked, has the world forgotten the mistakes of the 20th century? You see, we forget, and when we don't learn from the mistakes of history, it leads us to a moment like the crisis we're facing in Ukraine right now. But if we're to learn from those mistakes and avoid them, then we must learn all of history, the good, the bad, the uncomfortable, and the imperfect. We would do well to heed the wisdom of the authors of the Constitution who, in humility, did not claim a perfect union. The preamble calls us to collectively work toward a more perfect union. And that's the story of the United States that we teach in history classrooms, the collective pursuit of a more perfect union, and we teach students about the incredible achievements of this country, as we should. But that also means that we have to acknowledge the moments where we have collectively fallen short of our founding principles and ideas, as we can see in the experiences of individuals that have been facing discrimination, marginalization, or persecution on account of their gender, their sexual orientation, their religion, or their race. I recently heard an interview with a parent on TV who said that she, quote, wanted students to learn history, but let's not teach them about racism. I don't know how to do that as a social studies teacher because racism is uncomfortable, but we will not learn from the mistakes of history and avoid those mistakes in the future if we don't address the uncomfortable. And we need to acknowledge that learning about something uncomfortable doesn't mean you're responsible for it any more than learning about fascism means you're a fascist. So I implore you as a committee to reject any statutory language that prohibits discomfort in the classroom or would prohibit discussion of current events in the classroom, as my students have done this week with Ukraine. The second area of consensus is that overwhelmingly the teachers of South Carolina are doing exceptional work, not indoctrinating our students. And before somebody says I'm just saying that as a teacher, I'll remind you that the first parent you heard from 2 weeks ago stated, and I quote, 99.9% of teachers are doing the right thing. Let's focus on those 99.9%. And I will not claim that teachers are perfect, and when they make mistakes, they need to be addressed through local board policies, including some of the mistakes that have been heard here today. But let's come together collectively. Instead of asking people to talk about teachers to an attorney general hotline, let's collectively find a way to talk to and with each other like we do in a democracy. Instead of asking individuals to have teachers post every single piece of classroom material online, let's come together collectively to figure out how to effectively vet materials. And finally, as we talk about what's taught in the classrooms, let's collectively come together to acknowledge that there are 1,121 classrooms today where nothing is being taught because we can't find teachers in this state. And let us bring the same urgency to that issue that we're bringing to the ones before you, not because this is important, it is, but it's equally important, if not more, that we cannot staff our schools. So I thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions. PSTA provided you with 5 pages of feedback. I'd be happy to answer questions off those as well.
Patrick, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And I have deep respect for you as a teacher, educator, and an advocate.
Yes, ma'am.
And as I said at the very beginning, we're not on a witch hunt.
Yes, ma'am.
We're definitely not on a witch hunt. We realize that we have tremendous talent in our teachers out there, you being one, and parents who are truly concerned about the education of their students. And students who, to be perfectly honest with you, find themselves sometimes in the middle of adults who are fighting over the same thing, but maybe are trying to get there in a different way. Do you feel, as a teacher, that we as people who deal with education every day don't communicate with each other? And parents who want to be a part of the positive in the school district sometimes get pushed aside because parents may not go to a school board meeting unless they're angry about something. It's just like a legislator.
Sure.
You know, people come to us first when they're at the end of their rope, and most of them are very angry about being at the end of the rope, and we understand that. But there seems to be a disconnect in today's educational environment where parents, school boards, superintendents, and then it spills over into the teacher. And we all know that when the door closes and the rubber hits the road, it is the teacher. But, you know, we have teachers who say, my principal's never been in my classroom, so he or she really may not know what I'm doing. And on the other hand, when they get somebody coming in that's disturbed about something, which we have a lot of parents that are here today that are disturbed. There is a question in this. Do you feel that if we were more together in things, shared things more openly, and communicated better, we may not be here today?
Absolutely, Madam Chairwoman, and you unpackaged a lot of an onion I'd love to peel back sometime, but I'll stick to the question in honor of your time. Yes, I think that we do collectively have a problem, not just in schools, but societally, of talking past each other and not talking with each other. We talk at and about, but we don't talk to. And as a 17-year educator, I have never in my career been upset with a parent or family member bringing a concern to me, even if they're angry at me about something that sometimes I've done wrong. I'm more concerned with families I don't hear from. That's what concerns me as an educator. So every concern from a family and a parent is valid to me as an educator, because Representative Govan is right, the parent is the first educator. But as a teacher, I also have to address the needs of every student that's in my classroom, including those that don't belong to the parent and the family that has come to me. And so I've got to ride that balance. And I can only explain that balance if we're having conversation. And so I would encourage this committee. We've heard from some parents that have said, I've gone to a school board and I haven't gotten relief. If that's an instance, then let's address that. Because there are board policies that address some of these. I printed out, 17-year social studies teacher, I printed out some of the board policies I'm subject to in Richland too. And a lot of what we have heard as concerns, if I did those in my classroom, I'm in trouble. At point blank, I'm in trouble. But I don't fault families for not necessarily knowing that, because this is board policy IB and IMB, and it goes through like the letter ZXX or something. So if I'm a family member, of course I can't find all of those. But this is, of all the board policies, this matters more to families than probably anything else when it comes to some of the other stuff that are appropriate for board policy, but maybe not as public facing. So one thing that I've suggested to many of you in individual meetings is make a statutory requirement, if you want, to require school districts to inform families of the policies they have in place at the start of every school year, so that they are aware of how to address some of the concerns that have come before you. That facilitates conversation. That facilitates talking to and not past. Because we've got some policies, but if I'm a parent and I don't know the policy exists, it might as well not exist. So let's inform families. Let's do it on an annual basis. If we tell them in kindergarten, I've got a 5th grader and an 8th grader. I cannot tell you what was sent home to me last week, more or less what was sent home in kindergarten, because I'm trying to keep up with all the information. So let's do it on an annual basis. That'll facilitate that conversation that I think you're going for, Madam Chairwoman.
Good. Other questions of Patrick? Yes, Representative Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate your comments, appreciate our conversations about this. Were you here when the superintendent testified?
Yes, sir.
And did you hear her give an example of one of the complaints where elementary school students were told to role play slave owner and slave?
Unfortunately, yes, I did. Yes, sir.
And you would agree that that would be inappropriate under any type of curriculum, would you not?
I would agree, and the board policy I'm looking at in Richland 2 right now, if a teacher did that, that is unacceptable under board policy, which means that that teacher could face unprofessional conduct charges
Right.
against their certificate.
Absolutely, and I don't disagree with your proposition that maybe we should make some requirement to inform parents of these policies. And I'm not attacking that at all. I think it's a great idea. And I'm not necessarily saying I think any of these bills are perfect. And I think everybody understands the whole purpose of this is to try to figure out if there is some commonality in these bills and some of the issues we believe that might be out there to see if there is a final kind of product, or maybe there's not. But I think it's fair for us I think the policy point you bring up and the policies at the district level are appropriate if it's an isolated incident. But I think in cases where you believe there's a systematic issue, where there's not this one random case in Charleston, but when there's multiple issues in multiple districts across the state, then it would, in my opinion, need some type of statewide attention. And I think that's where these bills came from. And I've heard several people say, have you gone through your district? Have you gone through your superintendent? And I appreciate that. I think those types of issues should be resolved at the lowest level. But this is the question. You said, I think you're an AP government teacher?
Yes, sir.
Wouldn't you agree that the state government and our system of government holds a very unique position of power?
Yes, sir. My students would fire 10th Amendment at you right now, and I would applaud them.
Exactly. So we limited the powers. We created the federal government by giving them limited powers, correct?
The people did, yes, sir.
Yes. And then the people through the state also created the municipalities, the counties, and the special purpose districts, right, under them.
Yes, sir. Local governments are creatures of the state.
Exactly. So wouldn't it, if the state plays a part in funding those, and the state has an issue and believes one of these entities is not, necessarily doing what it needs to be doing, shouldn't the state be that entity that would rein that in or address those issues?
No, as I acknowledged, I don't think that there is no role for the state in this. I mean, some of the things that I have heard brought before you, as a parent of a fifth grader, I would have concerns with. So I'm not discounting a role for the state. What I'm asking for is to be careful with the broad brush that you could paint with statute at the state level that could cause inadvertent trickle-down consequences. The last speaker said something more eloquent than me, that something to the effect of sometimes the best laid consequence or the best intended consequences lead to unintended. If you pass statutes that say you can't have discomfort in the classroom, that mitigates anything that a teacher can do in a classroom in a social studies environment. We've heard some uncomfortable things today. You know what else is uncomfortable? The Holocaust, Jim Crow, slavery, Trail of Tears. Those cause discomfort, but we need to lean in on those.
Oh, and I agree with that, but here's my question. And you've read the bills, correct?
Yes, sir, all 5 of them.
And I've heard several of my committee members say that these bills would specifically prohibit the teaching of slavery.
No, sir, none of the bills would, but to be fair from the lens of a social studies teacher,
Right.
it prohibits anything that would cause a student discomfort, anguish, or other psychological distress on account of race, gender, sex. So let me give you an example from my classroom that I think I shared with you, but I'll share it to the whole committee. When I teach the expansion of slavery in AP government, which is required by my standards, we look at all the Jim Crow barriers to voting. We go through the grandfather clause, the poll tax, we go through all of them, and then we get to lynching. And when we get to lynching, we read a newspaper account from 1899 in Atlanta, Georgia of a lynching, because I want my students to have a moment, not where they feel discomfort, that's not my intent, but I want them to know full history, because the angriest I ever was as a student was a student who took AP everything in high school, had a bachelor's in history and political science in college, and then as a graduate student in an African American studies course, I learned about the reality of lynching. I had the same perspective that my students often have, that lynching was 4 crazy guys in a white hood at night that ran around and hung somebody, which is terrible. But it's a whole different animal when you find out it was 2,000 people in broad daylight that burned someone at a stake, cut up his body, sold his body as souvenirs, and then took the heart to the governor of Georgia. That's a different animal, and that causes discomfort, and that's a primary source. That's not a textbook. That is a literal newspaper article from Atlanta, Georgia in 1899. So to the point around discomfort, that's where slavery's uncomfortable. That's where we've got to be careful. There's a lot in these 5 bills, read and annotated. My students would be very proud of me. There's a lot in these bills that I don't have objection to.
Right.
But I'm telling you as a social studies teacher that discomfort language will chill effective instruction of the hard parts of our history.
Well, and I'm not even saying I support the discomfort language, but what I'm saying is there has to be something between having elementary school students role play slavery and then saying that we're trying to ban all African American history. Because that's the two positions after a lot of this testimony. That really seems to be like we operate on these far ends of the spectrum. And I think there is a logical and reasonable way to address these issues that are being brought forward that, you know, don't chill conversation, don't prevent teachers from teaching effectively, but at the same time, address legitimate, real concerns of parents. Do you agree?
Yes, sir, and that's the reason why in the opening of my remarks, I implored you to look past the differences and look to the areas of consensus.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do.
And I agree. So let's look at specific portions of the legislation. I didn't reject any piece of legislation out of hat when I opened my comments. I am bringing and surfacing for you specific passages of specific bills. And that's what we did in our 5 pages of testimony that we provided to you. It's not that we say,
Patrick,
reject
I
this
have
bill.
5 more questions.
Okay.
Could you?
Yes,
Okay, Representative
But
Trent.
Representative Moore, to your question, this information which was submitted to you, that I got plenty of copies if anybody wants one right now in case it didn't get printed for you. That's why I pointed out specific passages instead of bills at large to get to your point, because I agree with you. I reject the extremes that this is either we don't teach history at all or whatever the other extreme is at this point. There is a reasonable middle ground, and that's why we need to look specifically at details instead of bills at whole.
Well, I thank you for your work on that because I think that's what's really effective is actually working towards an actual solution. And that has to be in the details. It has to be in the specifics of the bills, not just, you know, talking about what you like and don't like. So I appreciate all your hard work on this.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Representative Trantham.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Mr. Kelly, is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
Thank you for coming today and
Yes,
speaking
ma'am.
to us. I read an article recently that said 2 million kids have left the public school system from 20 to 21. Real quickly, because I know we can't get into a full-blown conversation about this, but what would you say are maybe the top 3 reasons that parents are pulling their children out of public schools?
Well, if you're looking at 20 to 21 data, then I would say COVID, COVID, and COVID. And then I would acknowledge that concerns around curriculum, because that's always been a driving factor of homeschool. We homeschooled our girls for a year in DC when we moved there for a year. So I acknowledge that parents have that option, but the data you're looking at, Representative, you're right. There was a huge exodus in 2021, but actually I'm on the National Assessment Governing Board, so we get data on all schools across the entire nation, and I'm going to DC tomorrow for that reason. Public school enrollment has climbed back this year. Not quite to pre-COVID levels, but getting awfully close, and I think today is the first day in 2 years that the majority of school districts across this country have been not only operational 5 days face-to-face, but with no mask mandate. As that gets closer back to the normal we all knew and loved prior to March 2020, I think that data cycles back to what we used to see because we saw a bounce back this year.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Govan. No, Representative Morgan's next, then Govan, then Rivers.
I thought you were getting me confused with my
I
friend.
appreciate you keeping me to the left and then moving to the right.
Yeah, she just got us confused
I know.
because I'm better looking.
And you notice she moved us. We're not sitting next to each other
that's
anymore because
right.
we talked too much last time. All right, I have a couple of questions. Thank you.
Yeah,
First of
we're
all,
going to be 2, so, yes,
I'm going to
sir.
try to go very fast. First of all, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed that. We need to talk more. I think that you contacted me and I never got back to you about meeting. Is that accurate? Yeah.
It's accurate, but you're busy. It's good.
We need to make sure we do that because I have a lot of questions specifically about language in the bills that I will talk to you out of here. I'm so glad you were talking about that because I feel like that's actually why we're here is to discuss what's actually in the bills. And a lot of the testimony is, while some of it's good, a lot of it can just be off topic and be more what the national media is talking about right now, which is unfortunate. Okay, so you talked about don't limit the discussion of current events in the classroom. And actually, I was just reading how you were saying that our current standards talk about how we're supposed to be talking about current events.
Yes, sir.
how do we discuss, maybe as quick as you can answer, because I know we're running out of time, how do we discuss current political hot topics in the classroom in an appropriate way? How does a teacher do that parents would be totally okay with? What do you think is the ideal?
The key to that is a teacher should never present their opinion on a partisan topic as a fact. It's as simple as that. I've been trained since year one that if I've got a George W. Bush poster on the wall, there better be a John Kerry one right beside it. And I take pride as a teacher that after 17 years, I promise if you poll my former students and ask them, what is Mr. Kelly's partisan leaning? You're going to get 33% Republican, 33% Democrat, and 33% is just going to say he's bat crazy and we don't know what he is. Because a good teacher with a current event, so today with Ukraine, my students were studying the War Powers Act today. That could be the most boring lecture in the history of the world. The president must notify Congress within 48 hours. Instead, I pulled a tweet from Senator Mike Lee over the weekend that claimed that President Biden needed to notify Congress consistent with the War Powers Act because of repositioning 5,000 troops to Poland. So what did I do? I had my students read the tweet. I had them read the text of the War Powers Act, and then I said, okay, you're the Supreme Court. Who's in the right here? The senator, the president, or are we somewhere in between? And I played devil's advocate. The class tilted one way, and then I challenged them to think to the other side. I promise you, if you polled all 24 of them on the way out and said, well, how would Mr. Kelly rule? They don't have a clue. Because that's what great teaching is. We teach students how to critically think. We don't tell them how to think. And in instances where that occurs, that should be addressed. And again, the board policy I'm staring at would address that clear and full. My social studies curriculum coordinator in Richland 2 is actually here. She would vouch. If she walked into my class and observed me and Mr. Kelly said, candidate A is good or candidate A is bad, I'd have a problem.
No, I think that's a great answer, and I think that seems to be the fundamental issue that I'm hearing from parents and constituents and teachers, the feeling that in the classroom, everything's being overly politicized, or most things are, in social studies, and then in other ways in which we touch on social, as been brought up, from gender studies and all those type things. And there are a lot of theories that are coming down from higher ed that are maybe being pushed in those classrooms, and they're now being, as the argument is, that they're being then taught teachers how to use those things to make more classrooms that are more comfortable for people. Anyway, so I guess the thing is, you would say that it's not, that we currently have standards.
Yes, sir.
In South Carolina that should address most of this.
In what way? In terms of prohibiting the
most of the ideologies that we're talking about, whether it's CRT, the gender, well, even then though, but the gender says we just looked at all this stuff that's literally, they're giving the kids the login, they can go read about all this. Sure. I guess my confusion as the legislator, my frustration here is we're told that all of this stuff's there, it's not happening, but it almost feels like gaslighting because all these parents are saying, it's absolutely happening, and I've got teachers that are telling me that the person in the room next to them is doing it, and then now it's in the related curricular, whether it's not in actual stuff, it's in related stuff that they're looking up on their app. Sure. What from a teacher's perspective, where's the balance for us as legislators? I mean, we're sending all this money into this public school systems. We're telling parents they've got to put their kids in this. They've got, for 7 hours a day, and then parents feel like their political worldview, actually just their fundamental worldview and ideologies, are being questioned, and that they're being labeled or demonized for their political beliefs in the classroom. Because that's what I think indoctrination, maybe you can correct me actually on this, that really indoctrination comes down to demonizing other opinions. It's not even so much that I might not know what political belief you have, because I don't even really care personally if my kids know what political opinion a teacher might have. But I really care if in their classroom they're saying, you better believe this or you're stupid. You better believe this or you're ignorant. You better believe this or you're racist. Oh, your parents voted for that person? They're a racist. And that what they're supporting racist, oppressive regimes. You see what I'm saying? That's where I think the rubber really meets the road. Or vice versa. Oh, you voted that way? Well, your parents are commies. And whatever you want to do either way.
No, I agree completely. Representative Aremus brought up a great point at your first hearing on this about the school that had students dress in black in mourning when Hillary Clinton lost the election in 2016. Absolutely inappropriate. To your point, I agree, there are areas that can be addressed, but don't do it with such a broad brush and a shotgun approach that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Saying that because somebody may take the approach that you're talking about, which is inappropriate, that therefore the solution is to ban all discussion of current events, you're going to neuter effective instruction in this state.
Yeah.
So it needs to be more thoughtful than what is contained in some of these bills.
What do you think language then that would?
We have another question, so.
I'm so sorry. I think this is really important.
Okay.
Do you think language then that would specifically limit, maybe we even define indoctrination as demonizing current political viewpoints or alternative political viewpoints, something like that? Do you think that language from you and your teachers association would be more appropriate?
Sure, and let me ask you, well, I will say, I think this would answer your question. This is from the board policy that I've been referencing. Instructional staff should guard against giving personal opinions on sectarian or political questions or any other controversial, sensitive issues. So it doesn't say we can't teach controversial issues, just don't give your opinion. Issues should be presented impartially and in an atmosphere free of bias or prejudice where there is fair representation of multiple perspectives. To me, I think that's the answer to your question. If that is what the General Assembly wants to define as inappropriate indoctrination in the classroom, I have no objection to that with a teacher, and I can't imagine that our members would either.
What about age appropriateness then to that? Because
Absolutely. You can add that, but I would also offer that our standards are age appropriate. So what I teach in a 12th grade AP government classroom, I wouldn't tell my own 5th grade daughter right now, more or less someone else's 5th grade daughter in a classroom, because my standards are different than the 5th grade standards. So I agree, add age appropriate if desired, but I think the standards address that already.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'll let somebody else go. I
They
have
do.
a lot more, but I'll.
Representative Govan and then Representative Rivers.
Yeah, I can answer that question for him as a certified teacher. I will tell you that is true. You know, that's addressed in the standards in terms of the age appropriateness of any type of instruction. To my colleague, Representative Moore, I think you're right about the middle ground. The answer to that is simple. Let's just either teach and tell the truth. And then I think that's the middle ground. Just simply teach history, just teach the facts, just tell the truth. And we won't have to worry about it. My question is, could you give us your definition, and we've asked this of several people, but we want to be fair and ask you the same question, to define CRT, critical race theory, and your feeling as to whether there's a woke agenda and whether CRT is actually being taught in the schools.
CRT, as I understand it, is defined as an academic course of study that started at the law school level in the United States to examine if certain systemic elements of society, such as residential patterns, congressional districting, were racist if not in intent, in effect. I'll be honest with you, I've taught AP US government for 17 years. I've got a BA in history and political science and a master's in both. I didn't know what CRT was until some cable news stations started talking about it the last year and a half. So I had to learn and get educated. I can't speak to an agenda being present in schools universally. There are 55,000 teachers in this state, and I think it would be inappropriate for me to say that 55,000 anybody's has an agenda other than maybe Gamecock fans on a Saturday hoping we don't get our doors beaten off. We take what we can get. And do I think CRT is being taught in K-12 classrooms? As I defined it, which is why it's important to be specific in the statute. As I defined it, no, sir, I don't, because it's not in the standards for any of the courses that are taught at the K-12 level in South Carolina.
Representative Rivers.
Yes, Mr. Kelly. I guess my question is, what can be the consequences of a big lie? I mean, we've heard about voting, 2020 election, January 6th, now CRT. So what's the consequence of the big lie that ends up being seen as being true?
Well, I think that would be a distortion of truth. I as a teacher, become equally concerned about the conditions that enable a big lie to surface, and it goes back to the issue I brought up at the beginning about the need, and Chairwoman Allison brought up the need to talk together. I find that with my students that when they have a misunderstanding of a topic, whether it's content or whether it's just a peer issue with a friend, When they talk together, the truth usually comes to the surface. And as an educator, I am most concerned that our society is not talking to each other to learn from each other. That's what education is. The motto of USC, we may not be good at football, but we can crush a motto. Learning humanizes character and does not permit it to be cruel. That's what education's about. And untruth is cruelty. So we need to speak to each other to avoid the situation you're talking about.